Obviously, all the chords we're going to be learning from now until the next test are chromatic chords, which means they're going to require accidentals. It's unfortunate, but normally we can't really go back to the nice and easy days of theory 1 and 2 where all the chords just fit in the key, you have to remember too many accidentals. Let me put this away. So, today we're going to be talking about something called altered dominance. Altered dominance. And it's kind of basically what the name is about. It's going to regard and it's going to affect dominant chords, that is 5 chords and 5/7 chords. And you might think, no, I don't want you tampering with my, I have a special relationship with 5 and 5/7 chords. I like the way they sound. Don't mess with my dominant. Well, composers mess with the dominant. They mess with the dominant sound. In the 19th century, so we're talking about the 1800s, of course. In the 19th century, chromaticism infiltrated virtually every aspect of harmony in the style of music we're studying. One commonly used chord that was infused or injected with chromaticism was the dominant, that is the 5 chord and the 5/7. Romantic composers were fond of chromatically raising or lowering the 5th of these chords. The 5th. Not the root, not the 3rd, not the 7th. They're going to mess around with and tamper with the 5th of the chord. And the 5th of the chord, if you think about it, it's really the only chord member that can be touched or tampered with without changing the identity or the function of the dominant, right? Because the dominant needs its root. Its root is the dominant scale degree. You can't mess with that. The 3rd of a dominant or dominant 7th chord is key of the key. You can't mess with that or it won't have dominant function. And you really can't mess with the 7th of the chord either because that gives it its characteristic sound, tendency, tone, and all that has to resolve down by step. So really the 5th of a 5 triad or a 5/7 chord was the only one that they were going to mess around with. And it makes the chord obviously sound a little bit different, but it still possesses dominant function. Still possesses dominant function. So, I said that they chromatically raised or lowered the 5th of the 5 and the 5/7 chords. Now when I say chromatically raising the 5th, and by the way, the 5th we're talking about in this key, C, E, G is the dominant chord, we're talking about the G, obviously. This is the root of the chord, this is the 3rd, and this is the 5th. And when I say chromatically raising or lowering, that means they still use the same pitch lettering. They just adjusted that pitch by half step. Okay? So if I were to chromatically raise the 5th of this chord in the key of F major, I would get this chord, C, E, G sharp. And if I were to chromatically lower the 5th of this standard dominant chord in the key of F major, I would get C, E, G flat. Right? I'm not going to take the G and spell it as an A flat, even though that's just a half step higher. And I'm not going to lower the G to an F sharp, even though it's a half step lower. I'm going to keep the same letter name, but then raise it or lower it by half step. So it's still some kind of a G. Okay, now, the Roman numeral symbols for these chords are a bit awkward, unfortunately. Especially when these triads and 7th chords are inverted. They get really, really awkward. Let's start out with just some standard root position symbols for the altered dominant triad. That is, how would I label this chord? By the way, do you know that when you raise the 5th of a major triad, like I did to get this one, it becomes an augmented triad? And the symbol that I'd like you to use for this one is 5, sharp 5. It's basically a 5 chord with a raised 5th. For the 5 triad with a lowered 5th, I'd like you to use this symbol, 5, flat 5. Maybe is my handwriting not very legible? So 5 sharp 5 and 5 flat 5. Careful, I'm going to ask you about kind of a trick question. This chord over here with the fifth lowered by a half step, is that a diminished triad? No, it's technically not a diminished triad because it's got a major third above the root and then it's got like this diminished third above the root. So a diminished triad would actually be C, E flat, G flat. So this is a whole other animal in and of itself. Even though this one is an augmented triad, this is not a diminished triad. So again, they have strange sound, but when they're used in context, they actually not too bad. In the key of F major, here's your regular dominant, here's your dominant with a raised fifth, and here's your dominant with a lowered fifth. Let's continue by, let's try spelling some 5/7s with raised and lowered fifths. So in F major, your standard 5/7, as we know, is C, E, G, B flat. And this key signature I'll use to carry through here. How would you spell a 5/7 chord with a raised fifth? Well, leave all the other notes the same. Just raise the fifth a half step. So I've got C, E, G sharp, G flat. But all the other notes remain the same. And then finally, the 5/7 chord with a lowered fifth, still C, E, B flat, but it's G flat in this case. So C, E, G flat, B flat. And these are the Roman numeral symbols we'll use for the altered dominant sevens. We're going to use 5/7, sharp 5 written underneath the 7. And for the other one, we're going to use 5/7, and of course a flat 5 underneath that 7. Those will be the symbols that we use to analyze those chords. Now let's take a look at what we're going to label the chords, these chords when they're inverted. Okay, so for instance, let's say I have this chord right here, the 5 sharp 5. Let's say I have that in first inversion. So I have C, E, G sharp. The true symbols, the true numbers for inverted altered dominants are confusing. So what I've done, and I know that there's some other musicians and schools, music schools out there that do this. What I've done is I'm going to label an inverted altered dominant with its inversion number in parentheses next to the root position number. So in other words, how would I label this triad in root position? Well, I'd label it like this, 5 sharp 5. But since it's in first inversion, I'm going to put the inversion number in parentheses next to it. So the root position symbol with the inversion number next to it in parentheses. That's how we're going to do it. Otherwise, you have to get all these different numbers and you have to raise and lower some of these numbers above the base, and it's really messy. I think this is maybe a rather clear way to do it, even if it is a lot of writing. Let's try one like this. Let's say I take this one, the 5/7 sharp 5, and I put it in third inversion. Let's see here. How would I label that with a Roman numeral? Well, I put the root position symbol first, which is 5/7 sharp 5. but I see it's in third inversion. So in parentheses, what numbers do we use for third inversion? 7, 2, or 2? I write out of stats here. I should probably try one more. Let me erase some of this. Make a little space. What about a 5, 7, flat 5 in second inversion? Whoops, flat 5, not sharp 5. Okay. So C, E, G flat, B flat. This would be labeled with a Roman numeral as 5, 7, flat 5, and then the symbol for second inversion, 7th chords, which is 4, 3. That's how we do that.
So do you want us to include the 7 over the 5 plus the inversion? Or do you? Okay.
Yes, to show that you know it's a 7th chord. Yeah. When it's just a triad, like here, you wouldn't have to use a 7th. Just put the sharp 5 or the flat 5 and then the inversion of the parentheses. Okay, now, notice, like let's take a look at this chord way over here, the one on the far right. 5, 7, sharp 5 in third inversion. Notice, what is the interval between the bottom note, the bass note, B flat, and the top note, the G sharp? What is that interval? B flat up to G sharp is a 6th. Augmented 6th. Try not to confuse altered dominance in inversion with genuine augmented 6th chords. One way that you can make sure you distinguish them is this. If this chord is spelled in F major, does this augmented 6th between the bass and the top voice, is that between scale degrees lay and G in F major? No, absolutely not. In F major, an augmented 6th chord would have D flat on the bottom, and it would have B natural on the top to make the augmented 6th interval, lay and Fi. But here, you're going to find out that the augmented 6th interval in every altered dominant whatever chord in inversion, except for one, is not formed by lay and Fi. The augmented 6th interval is not formed by those two scale degrees. Okay? Here's another case in point. You might say, I don't know if you look at the chord this way, but I mean, you might say, well look, the bass note up to the highest note, G flat to E natural, that's an augmented 6th, isn't it? But is it a genuine, real, bona fide augmented 6th like Italian, French, or German? The answer is no, because the notes that create the augmented 6th interval are not scale degrees lay and Fi in F major. So it can't be an augmented 6th chord. Because augmented 6th chords, the augmented 6th interval is always spelled between lay and Fi. Okay. Let's see if I've got any examples here. Let's try spelling a few. Part of the homework assignment that is for the Monday after we come back from spring break just has you spelling a few of these altered dominants. Some might be in root position, some might be in inversion, that kind of thing. Okay, let's go with, how about one like this? Go to the key of E flat major, and instead of using key signatures, we'll just use accidentals. Just use accidentals. Let's try one of these. 5, 7, flat 5 in 4/3 inversion. Ooh. before I even put anything on the staff, I like to write out the notes. Maybe on a piece of scratch paper, maybe in the margin. By the way, it's okay to write out your notes in the margin and stuff, but try not to get it so big that I can't even read it. Because I've seen some papers, it's like, oh. Okay, so let's dispel a regular 5, 7, 5 in root position first. Well, in this case, the root is going to be B flat, right? Then D. Then normally it would be F and A flat, but I've got to lower the fifth a half step. So it looks like I need flat. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, for 3, put it in second inversion. Means the F flat is the one that goes on the bottom. Just put it together with the accidental on the staff. Okay, so F flat, A flat, B flat, and D. And that's what I'm talking about. Let's try one, I don't like doing this, but sometimes it's, again, I'll just give it a try. Give me a key. C. Oh, wow. Major or minor?
No.
Oh.
You ruined it.
Oh.
Oh my
So
God.
no key signatures, we're going to use accidentals. Let's try a 5-7 sharp 5 in first inversion. This is spontaneous here. We're just flying, on the spur of the moment. Okay, so a 5-7 sharp 5 in C minor is going to be G, is the root, B natural. Remember, don't alter any of the other notes, just the fifth of the chord. Normally it would be D and it would be F, but I've got to raise the fifth of the chord, correct? So it becomes D what? D sharp. Placing this 7th chord in first inversion means the B goes on the bottom. B. I'll have to get the accidentals in a bit. D sharp. All right, let me see here. The G nor the F need any accidentals. The D sharp needs one. And I guess technically the B does not need one since I don't have a key signature, but I'm just so used to raising that and putting the natural on there anyways. I think that's how I would finish up. But you see, you really can build these chords. You really can. So just make sure you're concentrating when you build them first. Make sure you get the right accidentals. And then if it's supposed to be spelled in inversion, then just put it in inversion on the step. Okay. I think my TV is turned off. By the way, the book has slightly different Roman numeral symbols for these chords, so you don't have to really pay attention to what the author uses in the book. Let's try this. I want to show you just one example out of the book, because believe it or not, even composers like Beethoven use these altered harmonies. Here we go. Bottom of page 423. That's what I was good. So we're in the key of B flat major here, and right at the end of the, well, right on the fourth beat of this third full measure, Beethoven uses a normal 5-triad, FAC. But you'll see on the and of B4 in this third measure, now he's got FAC sharp, E flat, which makes it one of these guys right here. And you see the author's symbol for our 5-7 sharp 5, he just uses 5 plus 7. I can find that confusing because sometimes you think, well, does that mean the 7 is altered? Does that mean the 7 is raised? But no, it doesn't mean that. So I'm kind of glad I don't use the author's terminology. But anyways, in the key of B flat, right there at the end of the third full measure, and then into the last measure, you see the C sharp and the soprano is still hanging around there. Beethoven uses a root position 5-7 sharp 5. Okay, so we basically have this, and then we have those two. And you'll notice, maybe you'll notice when you hear it this way, do you see that the sharp 5 of a 5 chord, it actually creates a chromatic passing tone between, and it'll go to the third of the 1 chord. So it's really kind of nice that way. You got a regular 5, and you got a raised 5th, and that goes to. So I guess there's a reason, why they use these things. The raised 5th of a 5 chord, it kind of acts like as a chromatic passing tone between the unaltered 5th and the third of the resolution chord, the 1 chord.
So, do you focus not to keep it like in the upper B's, or is that just
I think it's most prominent there. You can hear it pretty well, but I think you can use that altered 5th. You can use it in any voice. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I'm not. They have a few other examples in the book. I'm not necessarily going to go through all of those. We need to know though how to part write these chords. That's the only other thing we need to know how to do. So let me get a round staff going on this board here, and we'll look at that. Let's try some, well, let's try one, I should say, in the key of, how about A flat major? And let's try one of these, a 5-7 sharp 5. Now, first of all, I've got to get it spelled right, using good spacing in 4-voice texture. The bass note for a 5, any 5 chord in A flat is going to be E flat. I'm going to need a G, and I'll put the G in the soprano. What note will be the 5th of that chord? Not B flat, which is normal Broadway. Be natural. In this case, it means to raise it a half step. I'm going to put that in the tenor voice. And then the 7th of the chord looks like it's still your normal regular D flat. Okay, so there's one of those monstrosities, a 5-7 sharp 5 in 4 voices. And it's going to go to the same kind of thing a regular 5-7 goes to, which is a root position 1. Now, bear this in mind. When you part write altered dominance, the altered chord 5th, in this case, this pitch right here, it resolves or moves in the direction of its inflection. It rhymes on purpose so you can remember it. In other words, since this note, which is normally supposed to be B flat, since it's raised a half step to be natural, it wants to move how? Up or down? Up. Yeah, that's right. So the main thing to remember when you part write these altered dominants is that the altered chord fifth resolves always in the direction of its inflection. If I had lowered the fifth a half step from what it should be, then it would probably want to go down. But this time I have raised it. All the other rules for resolving the seventh of the chord and T of the key, if it's in an outer voice, all those rules still apply. They still remain the same. So when you think about this, and this is probably going to be the most we ever have, but do you know how many tendency tones this chord has? It's got 3. 3 out of 4. Because it's got a chord 7, which needs to come down by step. It's got T of the key in an outer voice, which has to go up by step. And it's got an altered fifth, which was raised, so that has to go up by step. Boy, what a mess, huh? But that's how it's supposed to be part written, how it's supposed to be resolved. So let's resolve it. The bass obviously has to go to A flat. You could take it up to an A flat or down to an A flat. It doesn't matter. I'll just take it down. Okay, let's take care of these tendency tones. G in the soprano has to go up to Do, A flat. The seventh of the chord has to come down by step, so it has to go to C. But it looks like the B natural also has to go to C. So look at this strange spelling, or strange, I guess, doubling of this chord. What we find out is that sometimes a 5 sharp 5 or 5 7 sharp 5 in this case, there's no fifth in the chord. We have to have 2 roots and we have to have 2/3. A doubled root and a doubled third. And that's okay. That's supposed to happen with these altered chords. Resolving the raised fifth of a 5 7 sharp 5 up, like we did here, results in a double third in the tonic triad. This is okay. It is correct. It is correct. There's no way, and this is sorry for this poor little arrow, but there's really no way that I can get a fifth in E flat in my A, C, E chord. There's no way, because I have too many tendency tones that are screaming to go a certain direction. So I'm just going to have to end up with 2 roots and 2/3. Let me take it over to the piano so I can actually read it. So we can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so we're in A flat major. And here is the altered 5 7 sharp 5. That's going to resolve to this. It's not a normal, this is a normal 5 7. But now we have E slow. That raised fifth wants to go up to. Again, when you play this on instruments in an ensemble or singing in a choir, it sounds so cool. It's so neat. Okay, what about, let's say I have this same chord, maybe I'll rearrange it, but let's say I put T of the key in an inner voice, so that it doesn't have to go up to Do. So let's see, can I redo it? Yeah, let's redo it this way. Let's do the G in an inner voice rather than in the soprano. Let's put the seventh of the chord right up there. Now, how many tendency tones do I have? Just 2. Because T is not considered a tendency tone because it's in an inner voice. And whenever T is in an inner voice, with these chords, when you part write it, I want you to frustrate it down. Because frustrating it down will get you the fifth of this chord. It'll get you a complete tone. So, my tendency tone, this one still has to go up. This one still has to go down. So I still have a double third. But rather than doubling the root again, it's better to have yet the final member of the chord in there. So I'm going to frustrate T down because it's in an inner voice. And now I can have, well, what do I have? I have 1 root, 1/5, and a double third. And that's preferable to 2 roots and 2/3. So whenever T of the key is in an inner voice, when you part write these chords, I want you to frustrate it down so you can get the chord fifth over here. That makes sense. And, so this one sounds kind of like, let's see here, which will resolve to this sound. One root, a third, a fifth, and another third. Okay, I gotta do one more. Any questions here? I gotta do one more part writing example. When you part write an altered dominant with a flat 5, very often what you end up with in your tonic chord is you end up with a triple root. And that's okay, and that's correct, because of the tendency of the altered fifth. So let's go, I don't know why I have it in a different key, but let's change keys to E major. And we're just going to part write, not even a seventh chord, we're going to part write, let's try it, 5, flat 5, in root position. Well, I have to get it spelled up here. Okay, the root is going to be B. And I'm going to have the B double because it's just a triad, not a seventh chord. So I'll put the other B in the alto. I'm going to need a D sharp. Put that in the soprano. And instead of an F sharp, what kind of F do I need for this time? An F natural. That's right. And so I'll put that in D tenor. But make sure you put the accidental on there. And it's a 5 chord with a lowered fifth. The fifth has been lowered by a half step. Now, by the way, this goes to 1 also. Is T of the key in an outer voice? Yes, it is. So that's a tendency tone. If it was in an inner voice, I would not consider it a tendency tone and I would frustrate it down. But this is a tendency tone. Also, the fifth, the altered fifth of the chord is a tendency tone. This one has been lowered a half step, so its inclination is to go which direction? Down. That's right. So I actually have 2 tendency tones in just a triad. All right, going to E, I'll take the bass up. The tenor has to go down to E. This has to go up to E. Oh, look at that, I have 3 roots already. Can I just keep the B here and have just a root and open fifth? No. A third of the triad is always required. So what am I going to have to do to this B? I'm going to have to take it to a G sharp. I'm going to have to move the B, and it's going to have to go down to that. What does that sound like? All right, so we've got, it's interesting, here's the regular dominant. Now we have this. It's nice, and it resolves to this. So I guess the moral of the story is for part writing is that sometimes 3 of the 4 voices when you part write these will be tendency tones. And so you have to obey and satisfy the tendencies of these tendency tones. Make sure you get those when you part write this chord. Sometimes the tonic will have to have a triple root. Sometimes the tonic will have to have a double third. That's okay. If T of the key is in an inner voice though, please frustrate it down. Do not take it up. Only take it up when it's in an outer voice. And that'll get you the best sounding, the best sonorous sounding tonic chord that you can get in resolution. I don't know that there's one of these, I don't think there's one of these on your homework, but, and I'm not gonna go into too much detail with these, but did you know that secondary dominance can also be altered like this? So for instance, I could technically have something like a 5-7 sharp 5 on a 4. I mean, think about it, right? Theoretically you can have that. This is a real, let me just leave you with one thing. The 5-7 flat 5. Let me make sure I get this right. When it's in second inversion, and when it's a secondary dominant of a 5 chord, this, just as one particular chord, in this inversion, is actually the same thing as the notes are exactly the equivalent to its next 6. Yes?
This is gonna be a future topic, but, are we gonna have to worry about, oh my god, I forgot my question. So are we gonna have to worry about resolving, or is it always gonna go to root 1? Like, or different inversions of the 1? You know, like, do you get my question?
Oh, you mean here?
Yeah, like, is it always gonna go to root?
Yeah, I think I'm only going to have you part right root position ones of these.
Will that change, or like just,
I don't think so.
okay.
I mean, we're not going to get too involved in this. We're just going to like do some basics with this, like we talked about, and then we're going to move on after the break to another chord.
Okay.
But I mean, can you imagine showing a freshman this? What on earth does that mean? Well, it's really, like you asked, it's an altered dominant with a lower fifth and second inversion, second, it's an applied chord to the class. Okay, now, if you pay attention to the assignment sheet, you'll notice that for Monday after break, you do not have to complete this. You only need to do certain exercises. Because on this handout, there are also some questions about 9th, 11th, and 13th course. So this is not due on Monday, actually. It's due on Monday. It's a handout that's going to last us several classes. This is due on Wednesday after break. On Monday after break, we're going to talk about 9th, 11th, and 13th course, and then you'll be able to finish it. But I strongly recommend that you do the ones I asked you to do with the altered dominant, because you'll forget if you wait till the end of the break.
No problem.
You mean like in this one?
And I have my lesson. I'm gonna have 2.5 hours drive.
Good. Oh, yeah. Well, that's what we're going to talk about after we get back. Okay, guys, have a good break. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very well put. Isn't that neat though, all these different reflections of these courses? Well, maybe over break, maybe you'll reminisce, or you'll review some, or you'll hear some of those songs.